In this lecture, let me recall my previous class. In my previous class, we were discussing about exceptions. This is hierarchy of exceptions. What it says, hierarchy of exceptions. Hierarchy means what? What is the importance of hierarchy? We will try to understand. Let me say time being hierarchy of exceptions. Hierarchy of exceptions. The hierarchy of exceptions and its knowledge is important. One must have idea on this hierarchy, and its knowledge is important for manipulating. Its knowledge is important for manipulating and handling exceptions. For manipulating and handling exceptions in efficient manner, or I can say exceptions thoroughly. I will repeat, hierarchy of exceptions and its knowledge is important for manipulating and handling exceptions thoroughly. These exceptions are predefined. All these are exceptions, built-in exceptions. We are not defined. It is built-in, predefined exceptions. These exceptions are built-in. I can say they are predefined exceptions, isn't it? These exceptions are predefined or built-in exceptions that come along with the JDK, Java Development Kit. If we speak strictly, all these exceptions are available in a package known as JAVA, Java.lang package. This is a package which we discussed in my previous lecture, isn't it? Java.lang package. All these are built in and which are available in Java.lang package. The root class of all exceptions is throwable. This is important. For all these exceptions, I can say this is root class. Of course, the throwable class, which is an immediate subclass, of object. This I have shown in my previous lecture, isn't it? Yes, let me repeat. The root class of all exceptions is throwable. The throwable class, which is an immediate subclass of object. This throwable class includes, just observe this particular, this one, throwable, isn't it? This is throwable. The throwable class includes two subclasses. First one is error and another one is exception. The exceptions, throwable and all these, as I told you, all these are defined in Java.lang package. As we do not bother much with error class. This one we do not bother worry. We do not worry much with error class. What is the reason? As it is raised by, when will it be raised? As it is raised by hardware failures. That you must understand. This also I discussed in my previous lecture, isn't it? We do not bother much with error class as it is raised by hardware failure, and programmer can do a little of it. That's what we discussed in our previous lecture. Again, anyway, we were discussing about this exception. Let me say I have runtime exception. Just see, this one is runtime exception. Even I can say unchecked exception. This is also known as runtime or unchecked exception. Let me call it as unchecked exceptions. All the exceptions are derived from the class throwable. That's what we were saying, isn't it? All the exceptions are derived from the class throwable. Throwable class includes two subclasses. First one is error and another one is exception. All the subclasses of exception, all the subclasses of exception class can be divided broadly into two categories, isn't it? Checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. I can say in simple manner, runtime exception is a subclass of exception class, isn't it? Runtime exception is a subclass of exception class. All the subclasses, let me write otherwise, all the subclasses, all the subclasses of runtime exception, of runtime exception, all the subclasses of runtime exception class, are called unchecked exceptions. Unchecked exceptions. What does it mean? All the subclass of runtime. This is runtime exception. All the subclasses of this particular runtime exception are called unchecked exceptions, isn't it? These exceptions, what is unchecked exception? What does it mean? These exceptions, whether caught or not, program will compile. That's important. Whether you caught or not, program will compile. Some examples, even I can say something like this. IO exception. Example for IO exception. What is an example for IO exception? In last class I discussed. For example, what is this? File not found exception. File not found exception. This is an example for IO input output exception. This I already discussed in previous lecture. Just let me, the file not found exception. What about this one? For index out of band exception. What is index out of band exception? We will try to understand what is index out of band exception after a few minutes. Time being, just say in index out of band exception you will get something like array index out of band exception. Array index out of band exception. Array index out of band exception, isn't it? Even you can have here string out of band exception. String index out of band exception. String index out of band exceptions. I will discuss all these exceptions. Even you can have here arithmetic exception. What is arithmetic exception? Arithmetic exception, I can say it is a part of arithmetic exception is a part of runtime or unchecked exceptions. If I speak strictly, we will analyze all these things. Time being, just understand, under index out of band exception, I have array index out of band exception and string index out of band exception. Of course, arithmetic exceptions are part of runtime exceptions. They are subclass of runtime exception. Even negative array size exception, it is also subclass of runtime exception. Let me say, as I told you, all the subclasses of runtime exception class are called unchecked exceptions. These exceptions, I will repeat, all the subclass of runtime exception class are called unchecked exceptions. These exceptions, whether caught or not, whether you caught this exception or not, program compiles. Whether you caught unchecked exception or not, program will compile. Some examples of runtime exceptions are arithmetic exception is an example of runtime or unchecked exception, array index out of bound exception. Just see this array index out of bound exception. Number, there is something like number format exception that I will discuss. This number format exception. This is also number format exception. This is also part of runtime or unchecked exception. A runtime error or otherwise a runtime error. Runtime error means it's an exception. A runtime error caused by dividing by 0. Dividing by 0 is called arithmetic exception. Anyway, we will try to understand these simple things with the help of simple programs. Just see this one. Class space class name AIOBE1. My intention is array index out of bound exception. That's why I am writing AIOBE1. Whichever name you want, you can write. Public static void main string args. You know the meaning of this particular method, isn't it? What does it mean? Int means data type, x means array name, square bracket. We know how to initialize an array. X this is x0, isn't it? This one is x0, this one is x1, this one is x2, isn't it? System.out.println x4. Do we have x4 location? We don't have x4 location. If you observe this one, if you execute this one, just see, just observe this one. Let me clear the screen. Let me say yes, JAVAC space AIOBE1.java. This program is compiling. That's what we were saying. For unchecked exceptions, for runtime exceptions, for unchecked exceptions, program compiles. Therefore, you are not getting any compilation error. It will compile, but while running, we will get exception. What is the reason? As fourth element does not exist in the array. X of 4 means what? There is no fourth element that does not exist in the array whose size is 3. Just observe, this array size is 3. But you are trying to access an element x of 4 which generates an exception. Just see what it says, exception in thread main java.lang. As I told you, all the exceptions are defined in a package known as java.lang. Array index out of bound exception. This particular exception is known as array index out of bound exception. Why? Because there is no x4 index. We have x0 index, x1 index, x2 index, but we don't have x4 index. As it is unchecked exception, as it is runtime exception, therefore program compiles, but your program will not get executed, isn't it? Just go through it. It's simple one. Let me show one more simple illustration. Just see this program related to an exception known as number format exception. What is that? Number format exception. Number format exception, isn't it? This exception is raised when a string value is not, just see, let me say class name AIOBE. What does it mean? Array index out of bound exception. My intention is but whatever name but actually it's not array index out of bound exception. It's a number format exception. Whichever name you want, you can write, isn't it? This exception is raised when string value is not parsed successfully. Still, just say this program compiles. JAVAC space AIOBE. This program compiles. That's what I am saying. For unchecked exceptions, for runtime exception, program compiles. When you are trying to execute, when you are trying to run the program, it will generate an error, isn't it? This exception is raised when a string value, string str equal to 5.2, it's a string value, is not parsed. String value is not parsed successfully at runtime. Isn't it? For example, just string str equal to 5.2. In this code, 5.2, what is this 5.2? It is a double value. isn't it? 5.2 is a double value that cannot be parsed. Just integer dot parse int. This double value cannot be parsed. Double value cannot be parsed. Cannot be parsed. This cannot be parsed. Double value cannot be, this particular value cannot be parsed with integer class. With integer class. Here we are using integer dot. Integer dot means we are using integer class. You are trying to parse with integer class, isn't it? If 5.2 is replaced with 5, if this 5.2 is replaced with 5, it works. It compiles successfully, isn't it? Of course it will run if this 5.2 replaced by 5, isn't it? It just while running the program, it is generating which exception it is generating. It is generating an exception is known as number format exception. Why? Because it is actually a double value. You are trying to parse with integer class. Therefore, it is not able to parse. It will generate an exception. It will generate an exception for 5.2. As I told you, if it is replaced by 5, you won't get this particular exception. Integer parser, this integer class, this double value cannot be parsed by integer class. Hence, it is generating an exception. Just go through this one. Let me demonstrate this once so that one can understand. Just see. Yes. Let me go to command prompt. JAVAC space AIOBE1.java. Isn't it? Let me run this program. How can I run? Yes. JAVA space. Let me remove C. Yes. That's what it says. It's compiling but running array index out of bound exception it's giving. In similar manner, there is another program, JAVAC space AIOBE.java. It is related to our number format exception. Just see, this is exception in thread main java.long.number format exception. This is simple lecture. Just go through it. If you have any difficulty, please keep a comment. Thank you very much.